Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. Firstly, I'd love to welcome all of the Deloitte Australia brand and marketing teams from Sydney and Melbourne. I recently did a keynote presentation Q&A on everything I've learned from the amazing guests we've had on the show, and we've got a whole lot of new listeners, so welcome. Today, my guest is Anna Cheng. Anna's the head of marketing at Turo Australia, and if you didn't know, Turo is a peer-to-peer car-sharing marketplace where you can rent out your personal vehicle. Think of it as the Airbnb for cars or like Car Next Door. Before Turo, Anna was Spaceship's third employee and helped them get $100 million in funds under management in just 4 months. She scaled Health Match to 1 million users in just 10 months. She's a growth hacker, a mentor, an advisor, and a fellow at Afterwork Adventures, a community-powered VC fund making early-stage investments in Aussie and Kiwi startups. Anna, wow, what a journey. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. What is it about you that was drawn to the sort of world of business and marketing?
Initially, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my career. My mum was in finance and I thought, that was a safe career path for me. And I actually dabbled in finance for a really long time before I decided that it wasn't for me. My passion was always in consumer psychology, and the parts of finance and economics and the parts of my degree that I really resonated with was always the part where it was like, this is how supply and demand interact with each other, and these are the irrational decisions that investors make. So I figured out early on that it was actually consumer psychology that I was really interested in, and naturally gravitated towards marketing because of it. So my first stint after I, quit my accounting job was actually to start my own business when I was 19. Started it with a couple of friends. It was called Get Foodie at the time, to connect home chefs with consumers. And the whole idea was, if you were already cooking 4 portions of spaghetti at home for your family, why not cook that extra 5th or 6th portion, sell it and make a bit of profit, or even at least recoup the cost of your ingredients. And so that was the whole premise. I used to spend, exam week in the uni kitchens cooking up 60 portions of spaghetti, advertising it on Facebook groups to see, would people pay $7 for this? Would people pay an extra $3 for delivery, or go to a central location to pick it up? And there were all this testing involved in it that I, didn't realize at the time, but was actually part of the fundamentals of what we now call growth hacking or growth marketing. And it was this idea of like doing an MVP and testing and learning and using that to accelerate the feedback loop. So that was actually my first entry point into marketing. The businesses are now pivoted into focusing specifically on baked goods, called En's Bakery, which now has 400,000 Instagram followers, which is pretty insane. But yeah, I actually grew the first 12,000 when I was in that role and really got into marketing that way.
So big question, how does your mum feel about your change in career path?
At first, she was actually not supportive because she really liked finance and she respects numbers a lot. I also, during the time, deferred uni to work specifically on startups, which was not a decision she also supported. But now I think she sees how happy I am and how balanced my life is, and I think she enjoys that I'm happy.
Nice. I feel like growth marketing at its core, there's a lot of sort of vulnerability and thinking differently, not being afraid to put yourself out there and ask for feedback and that kind of iterative approach. Where does that come from for you personally?
I don't actually think that was an organic trait of mine, which is very interesting. So I actually led most of my life extremely risk averse, which probably made sense that I was doing a commerce degree and just sort of had a very clear career path. Like I knew every single year of uni what I was supposed to do, what does success look like. For example, for a typical commerce student, year 1, you go into societies. Year 2, like hopefully you're doing a pre-penult internship at one of the big 4s. Then year 3, you're doing your proper internship in your penultimate year. Then year 4, you're now, securing your grad role sort of thing. And so there was a very clear path to success.
So tell me about your first growth marketing role.
Yes. So my first growth marketing role was actually at a very small startup focusing on mental health and this idea of online psychological therapy. It was a role that was advertised on this group called Sydney Startups, which maybe a lot of people know now, but back then it was very tiny. The founder had advertised the role. I clicked on the website. It was the type of website where the background would stay static, but all the text moved when you scrolled. And I felt like, I don't really have much experience, but I know immediately there's some value I can add. So I took on that role. Initially, it was meant to be 2 days a week. I ended up doing full-time just because of how much I loved it. And so ended up doing a full-time uni, full-time startup sort of thing where I just basically didn't sleep. And my uni grades definitely took a hit that year. But it was a lot of fun. I used to, listen to a lot of talks because Muridi would organize speakers from different startups to come and talk to us. I would write down everything that they said. I would Google it at home later. I would then implement it at work. And I just naturally fell into this cycle of learning and testing and then using that data to feed into my next experiment. And so it came to me quite naturally. And I just knew, because of the types of problems that were constantly coming up and new things to solve and new challenges, I just knew it was a career for me.
So good. It sounds like working with you would be a whole lot of experiments and giving things a go. How do you stay fresh now? How do you get fresh inputs yourself?
I think naturally, because now I'm at Turo, marketplaces are so nuanced that you're constantly focusing on demand and supply, and it's just naturally there's new problems every single day, and that's actually what keeps me going. I think there's just something different to solve every single day, and that's a way that I keep my problem solving mindset. It just never gets boring. Other ways that I learn is I do a lot of mentoring, and although mentoring sounds like it's about me giving back to the community and helping others with my experience, I actually also see it the other way around. When you're doing a full-time job, you only get exposed to one business model during that time, which also means your learnings are quite limited to how can you grow that one business model. And so, you'll notice that your channel expertise will really focus on what will work for that particular business model. In Turo's case, as an example, it's Google SEM. In my previous role, it was Meta and SEO. In my role before that, it was probably something totally different. And so you're very limited to the channels that work for the business. Of course, you go out and you try to do others, but most of the time there's only one channel that works extremely well, and then you spend the rest of your time trying to diversify. By mentoring others, I actually really enjoy the process of learning other people's business models, and they're also at different stages. So solving for a different stage of business with different business priorities. And it sort of forces you to apply your marketing fundamentals to different business models. And I think I learn a lot from that. So I love that. And I also learn from the problems that they're facing and the things they've tested. And sometimes they're the ones teaching me that they've tried a channel that works, and I can go and implement it at Turo. So I actually love getting exposed to new business models. So I do it that way. And then the other thing I also do is I also love attending talks. I still do it. It's something I've continued doing since, I had 1 year of experience to now closer to 10 years. I love hearing from other experts who've done it before. I love hearing different opinions. Sometimes you don't necessarily agree with it, or you might not implement it at work, but it's good to hear different perspectives and what has worked for other people as well.
It feels like the red thread throughout your career and maybe who you are as a person is very sort of interactive and two-way and feedback and sort of trying new things, which I wonder, what's the cadence like in your workplace, in your role, working with colleagues? Do you work on sprints? Do you work on experiments? Are you formulaic? Are you very sort of go with the wind until something sticks? Give me a bit of a sense of how you like to operate.
Maybe because I come from mostly a performance marketing background, I am extremely rigorous with how I approach experimentation. Although I no longer am the one hands-on on the tools, I still embed that culture within my team. And so, for example, my team has a goal of every single week they must run one experiment. The following week, they will analyze and produce a report for the experiment they ran the week before, or whatever the cadence is. Maybe it's not always a week. For example, some experiments take longer and things like that. But it's either an experiment or an optimization that they must do every single week. And it's to encourage this, cadence of learning, being quick with, the types of campaigns that you're putting out, to understand how things are going, to be really tight on the numbers is also very important to me. And so it's just something that's been constant throughout my career, this idea of experimentation. And it's something that I also train my team to do. Sometimes things fail, or sometimes, the results are so incremental, it feels like it didn't make a difference to the bottom line. But over time, it just really stacks up. And, I think that is actually one of the big reasons why Turo has been so successful since launch, and we've been growing triple digits every year, year on year. And I think a big reason for that is because of our culture of experimentation and not being afraid to fail as well. There are bad ideas, but if you find an idea that within the constraints is worth testing, then I would definitely be an advocate for testing it.
Yeah, incredible. Take me back to your time at Spaceship. You were Spaceship's third employee. You helped raise $100 million in funds under management in 4 months. How?
I think it was a lot of actually beginner's luck at the time. So I think because I didn't come in with a lot of experience or a lot of ingrained views about how things should have been done, I had no choice but to start from a blank slate. Back then, I was a big believer in first principles. And so I wanted everything to be embedded in data that I was going to find out for the first time when I ran an experiment. So I actually spent my first 2 weeks in that role interviewing 200 people who had initially expressed interest in Spaceship's product. I was building out the customer persona survey, really trying to understand their goals and challenges when it came to superannuation, which was actually Spaceship's, I should probably point out, that was actually Spaceship's first product, was a superannuation fund that had a heavier skew towards tech companies than maybe your traditional Australian superannuation funds that focus more on the ASX 200. And so, trying to understand what would motivate them to move something that was actually deeply important, which is their entire retirement savings, to a fund that has never existed before. We couldn't even advertise any historical returns. And, that process of building trust was very interesting to me. And again, like focusing on consumer psychology, like how do I make someone who's completely new to this brand trust this brand enough to invest their retirement savings? That was like a huge challenge. And so I think the first thing, really understanding who your customers were and who they weren't was extremely important. At the beginning, because you're so resource constrained, you really need to focus on the low-hanging fruit. You don't want to be in a niche forever, but at the very beginning of your business, when you're limited with time, limited with money, you need to pick a niche and do really well at it. And so the niche for Spaceship was millennials who worked in tech. And the reason that worked so well was because millennials had a longer investment horizon, which meant that they could take on more risk when it came to superannuation. And at the same time, they worked in tech. So they really understood our investment ethos, which was to weight more of your portfolio in the Amazons of the world rather than your BHP and the big four banks, for example. And so that was the whole philosophy. So I ran these surveys. I wrote down, again, everything that they said, which is typing is my superpower, actually. I just type so fast. Now, I guess you have AI note takers, but back then it was all my fast typing speed. And so I'd write down everything they said. I would cluster certain keywords or certain themes that would come up. I would try to apply like a quantitative lens onto qualitative data. So, how often did this particular theme come up? How often did they say these particular keywords? And then I would group them together. And that was actually what informed what went on the landing page. On the landing page itself, we ran, this not so novel anymore, but back then it was this new concept of like a referral waitlist campaign where it was really focused on you put in your email, then you're in group 36 of the waitlist, complete your profile, verify your mobile number, then you would get bumped up into group 26 of the waitlist. And then for every friend that you refer from then on, you'd get bumped up an extra 5 groups. So if you do the maths, you need to invite 5 friends to be in group 1. And so the whole idea of this waitlist was to encourage like the social proof. On the page, we had like tweets of other people referring friends. Our top referrer, I think, referred over 30 people. And so the waitlist was a huge success. And I just think when it came to viral waitlist, it's just such a great idea because first, like you're really able to test your messaging. But second, for every dollar that you're putting into your marketing at the top of the funnel, you're then applying a multiplier effect based on the virality of your waitlist itself. And so if you imagine for every person who referred one other person, you've just halved your cost per acquisition. And so that worked extremely well for Spaceship. Though, of course, when you have a waitlist, you can't just let it sit on your website and not drive traffic to it. And so, we had a multi-pronged approach to driving traffic to that waitlist. And a lot of it was related to building trust and how do we convince someone to, again, like take a bet on this new startup to manage their superannuation savings. And so first before influencer marketing was a thing, we actually had our angel investors featured on ads. So again, to the right audience, this would be extremely relevant. And when you're on a limited budget, again, you're not thinking like, how do I reach everyone in Australia? You're thinking like, how do I make my budget go further for this particular audience? So I don't really care about, the general public. I just want to be extremely loud to this one very small niche because I don't have the money to spend on, 26 million people. I can seem extremely loud and almost unavoidable to this one audience of millennials in tech. And so we featured Mike Cannon-Brooks, who was an angel investor at the time, in our ads. That was our best performing ad creative. We had Jane Liu, who was also invested in Spaceship, in our ads as well. And they're extremely recognizable figures in the tech space. And so, immediately building trust by what I say is like leveraging someone else's trust that they've already built with their audience. So I also stronger 5,000 Twitter followers. It just automatically piped into this tool called Intercom, and I don't really know why they do it because they're a chat tool. But I could see that if they had over 5,000 followers on Twitter, I would just send them a bookmark, a handwritten note, a t-shirt, and just say like, hey, thank you for supporting Spaceship. If you received this, please tweet a photo of the merch at us so we know you got it. And then again, accessing over 5,000 of their followers who again recognize them as their peers. And so a lot of like growth hacky things that, in the long run is something you probably can't do at scale. But at that time, it did what we needed it to do, which was make our money go further and seem extremely loud and almost omnipresent to that one audience. The very final thing I did was I hit people who have looked up to certain figures in their life in the tech space. I've now also reached out to their peers, and now it's about what people see as like trusted sources of information, which would be like your PR outlets, your awards, talks and things like that. And so we've also focused a lot on PR, winning, fintech awards, and also like running talks at Spaceship events, which is where we would invite, a prominent figure in the tech space. So sometimes Nikki Skavac, sometimes Jane Liu, sometimes like Mizko, who was a very popular designer as well, to come and speak to the tech crowd, and they would bring in their own audience. And again, attaching our brand onto theirs. And so that was really the strategy at the time to drive traffic to the waitlist. And I'd say, over that 4 months, we'd built a waitlist of 40,000 people, which is pretty crazy. And our spend, was pretty small. So it was an incredible achievement. And I think, a lot of that came to just how much focus we built onto, really tapping into that one audience and not being distracted by too many other things.
Incredible. Feels like what you don't have in budget, what you lack in budget, you make up for in hard work, just rolling up your sleeves, getting it done, jumping on ideas and, the timeliness of the content. So then you moved over to Health Match. Tell me a bit about Health Match and how did you go about scaling to 1 million users in 10 months? I mean, was it the same principles? Did you have to reimagine things a second time around?
Yeah, Health Match was in a bit of a different stage. So Health Match, for those who don't know, is a platform that connects patients to clinical trials. So if you're experiencing depression, for example, and maybe traditional forms of medicine is not working for you, it would essentially allow you to sign up for a clinical trial within your area and test new forms of medication. And so Health Match at that time when I joined was a Series B company. So they had already grown pretty fast actually to 80,000 users. And my mentor had just signed on as their new head of growth. So my mentor is Andre Pinantolan, who was the first head of growth of Canva and sort of helped Canva grow from, a small company to the multi-billion-dollar mammoth of a company that we now know and love. So he was the person behind that. And I'm also very thankful for that because he taught me the right marketing fundamentals from day one. So when he moved over to Health Match, he, hit me up. I was at Bright and he said, hey, do you want to come along for this SEO role? And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. I've never done SEO before, but he sort of just trusted that I'd be able to pick it up. And so that was great. So yeah, from the SEO was actually my first role at Health Match. So SEO was really interesting. It was the first time I'd ever done it. And I was learning from the SEO expert because as most people know, Canva grew primarily from SEO, which is a free channel. And so yeah, SEO was great. We worked on it together, grew that from essentially zero to, by the time we left, like around 2 million sessions per month. I then got moved into a performance marketing role, which was more of my bread and butter. And so there we were running meta ads specifically. So the difference, this is actually a really important learning I had about meta ads, was that it was actually really important to tailor your creative to be very specific to the audience you're targeting. So earlier in Health Match's journey, they were focused a lot on generic clinical trial ads. So they would say, sign up for a clinical trial. And the messaging was very generic about just any clinical trial. And also something else that we learned was we thought, trending formats like UGCs and video content would actually perform way better than, a static image ad. And so we did a lot of testing in this case, again, going back into my culture of like rigorous testing experimentation. And when you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in ads, you do need that level of rigor when it comes to testing. And so we tested everything, right? And our initial hypothesis was that UGCs would perform the best. We would get paid actors to film their experience going through Health Match, booking a clinical trial, going to a clinical trial and explaining that experience. And back then, I've shared this publicly, it was around like $80 per conversion. And we really thought, that was going to be it and we would just iterate on that. But we continued doing wide swing testing. So in the meta world, we do, what we call wide swings, which are like testing completely new angles or completely new formats. And then of the winners, we then iterate on them and make little small changes. That way you're constantly looking for, huge improvements in efficiency. But at the same time, when you've hit them, then you're also, making, those little 10% improvements at the same time as well. And so, and especially when you're spending a lot, you have to do that to avoid fatigue. And so we were testing everything. And surprisingly, the best performing ad was purple background, white text, very specifically, have you considered a clinical trial for breast cancer, for example? And that was what performed the best because that actually tailors the algorithm to specifically target people with breast cancer who are considering clinical trials, or sometimes even better, we would specify what type of clinical trial it was. And so that was actually a very important lesson we learned. And so that, what dictates what does well on platform. So that will potentially give you a better CTR on that ad. However, the next step is equally as important, which is once they land on your landing page, like what happens. And so we did a lot of landing page testing as well. Like I think upwards of like 60 different tests on one page. We tested, what if we include a founder bio? What if we include testimonials? What if we include a phone number for people to call if they have questions? And again, these are all things that intuitively feels like it makes sense. Oh, like, yeah, of course people would want FAQs. Of course people would want to, hear more about the story or hear from other patients. Reality is, after lots and lots of testing, the page that performed 3 times better was actually just deleting everything below the fold, removing everything from the nav, and just forcing people to focus on the CTA on the page, and the CTA changing from something that's high commitment, like apply now, to check your eligibility. And that was all it took. So that 3x'd our conversion rate on that page. But again, it's something that feels like it goes against your intuition. Like everything about your intuition saying like they want more trust factors on the page. They want social proof. They want more information. When in reality, what they wanted was for the page to load faster and for them to not get distracted by anything else. And so my main takeaway from that experience was, first, like how to scale a business. So, when you're when you're spending, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on a campaign, you need to know how to scale in the way that you've set up your account structure. That's extremely important. And the way that you're building, testing, learning from creatives at an extremely fast pace, that was quite important. And the second thing was that you can never just leave it up to hunch. So if I'd gone with my gut, I would have been wrong 100% of the time. And so testing is the best way to validate what is actually happening in the real world and what will actually drive results. And so my recommendation is rather than debating over hypotheticals for, as long as you can, or focusing on getting your forecast as accurate as possible, just put an MVP out into the real world and see how the market reacts. I think that is going to be the best indicator of whether or not something's going to be successful. And so those are the key learnings I took away from my time at Health Match.
And how much of it would you say is replicable across growth marketing roles versus the principles remain the same, but the method almost always changes?
I think it's definitely the fundamentals that are important. It's the culture you have around experimentation. It's your mindset that is probably more important itself than the tactics or, what formats have worked for you in the past, which I noticed that a lot of people do ask me. They always ask me, first of all, what channel should I be focusing on? What has worked for you? What types of ads have worked for you? What copy works for you? And I actually think, what works for me or the business models that I've worked in doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. So I would always start from scratch, start from first principles and work your way up from that. In terms of how replicable is it? Again, the fundamentals will be replicable. However, things change a lot. Algorithms change. When I first started in marketing, back then you were bidding on Google AdWords is what it was called. And now no one says AdWords. And you were doing a lot of manual adjustments, whereas now it's all automated or based on the algorithm. And so things change really fast. I think focus less on the tactics and more on the underlying decision-making frameworks that you should be using when you're deciding what to invest in, what to prioritize, and things like that.
You mentioned before that creative testing was really important to the success of the ads. How have you approached developing creative? Have you always developed it internally with your own designers? Have you lent on agencies? What's been your approach?
I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong approach. And I really think it's based based on the resources that you have. So I actually think the success to creative is not really even about how good at design your designer is. It's actually more about how much again, going back to it, like how much you're willing to test different format and things like that. And so the way I approach creative testing is first, I open up the brainstorm to everyone. So it's not just marketers brainstorming. Everyone has a role in the business. Everyone talks to customers and have different interaction with customers and hear different types of motivations or challenges that customers have. Those are all great breeding grounds for great creative. So first, I think open up the brainstorm to everyone. Then in the brainstorm, you should also focus on, the research that you're doing in market. So as a marketer, and I don't know if this is like healthy, but I never switch off from ads. So, as I'm scrolling Instagram or TikTok as a consumer, I'm noticing what actually gets me to pause. So that's actually something we now track called a thumb stop rate, which is just, how many people or what's the conversion rate of people who actually pause on your ad for the first 3 seconds, which means that it's gotten their attention. And so I focus on a lot of things like that. And then I actually save the ad and then I bring it into that brainstorm and suggest that as like a way that we could, as like an ad that we could test in the future as well. And so that's something that we take into consideration. We also look at other advertisers and we look at, what are the types of ads that they're running? What are the formats that they're using? A trick I like to use is that, and a free version to do it is like Facebook Ads Library. Just go through, pick some brands you like. One that I personally really like is Leica, which is the human grade dog food brand. They do a lot of creative testing. So say I look up Leica on Facebook Ads Library, I actually immediately scroll all the way down to the bottom and see what is the ad that they've been running the longest. If they've been running an ad for 6 months, that's a good indicator that it's an ad that's working for them or a format that's working for them. Then I scroll up a little bit and I see how often certain formats have been iterated on. So you might see the same comparison ad, which is a split screen down the middle, and then with different copy. And you might see that, appear 8 times in the history of the ads that they've ran. That was a format that's working for them because of the amount of times they've iterated on it. And so it's a really great way to find out, what other formats are working for other brands. What should I be testing next as well? And just a great way to get inspo. I now also use a tool called Magic Brief, which is actually curates a bunch of different brands and categorizes them into themes. So for example, they might have a category for sale or promo-led advertising. They might have a category for comparison ads. And it's just a very handy way of also discovering other brands who advertise who might be doing a great job at launching new formats as well. So it doesn't rely on like the brands, if I only had Facebook Ads Library, I might just continuously repeat the same brands that I look at. Whereas on Magic Brief, I find that they also surface new brands I've never considered before. So also love Magic Brief for that. But more importantly, Magic Brief is amazing for analytics. So again, being able to track other brands, seeing, which one of their ads have used the same, opening line. So for example, I can't remember which audiobook brand this was, but I think it was like 80% of their ads all start with, "Hey, what's that book you're reading?" And that line works as a thumb stop mechanism because they've been using it in 80% of their ads. You can also then apply that type of analysis to your own ads. So you can see of the video ads that you're running, how many do really well for a thumb stop. That might tell you that you want to use that hook for longer. And for other ads, you can also see what's the hold rate, which means people who watch past the 3 seconds and continue watching throughout the rest of the video. So what's the hold rate? How do you hold attention in the video? And maybe you'll find that one ad does really well for thumb stop, another one does really well for hold, and you want to maybe Frankenstein those 2 ads together to get like a really well performing ad. And the very last thing is something that you can also track on platform, which is just the conversion rate. So an ideal ad would essentially have a really strong thumb stop rate, a great hold rate, as well as a great conversion rate. And so having this level of analytics also helps you figure out like what types of ads you need to be developing. And so I love that about Magic Brief as well. And so that's like a tool that we use in our creative development process. And then only then do you get to the production process. And so, after doing all this research, which I actually think is the most important part of the process, then you get to like production. And so in smaller teams, I've definitely done it through Canva. So I think it's also like good to just have the skill of being able to do, very quick like image or video editing. So, whether you familiarize yourself with CapCut and Canva, I think those are like the tools that you need just to get like a basic test out there. So you can definitely do it self-serve. Now that I'm mature and there are like other resources to leverage, we have like freelance copywriters, we have freelance designers who can pick up that development process as well and maybe just make it more polished than what I could do, for example. But it also like saves me time and lets me focus on more strategic things. And so, yeah, I think it just really depends on the resources that you have. But I'd say like the more important part is the brainstorming part and coming up with ideas and prioritizing those ideas rather than the development part itself.
It sounds relentless. I mean, these growth roles are sort of in pursuit, obviously, of growth in any way possible. How do you not lose your energy? What keeps you excited?
I think it's just so fast paced and you have a different problem to solve every day. I think that's genuinely what gets me up every morning. If you're looking at the bigger picture, you also think about what impact you're making and the business that you're supporting or working for and what problem they're solving in the world. And you can also feel motivated by that as well. Like personally, I do. So although it's like really fun from a marketing perspective because it is a marketplace, again, like the nuance of a marketplace and the sheer amount of metrics that you have to focus on is really interesting. But even like beyond that, like Turo is a marketplace that essentially helps people earn money. Like Turo has since launch in Australia generated $42 million worth of earnings to hosts on the platform. And so these are their livelihoods. And I always think about that. And, instead of thinking like, oh, I'm just making a cute ad to move some metrics, you're actually thinking, wow, I'm actually changing someone's life. I'm helping them generate business that will, feed their family and, help them accelerate their business. I actually would love to share like a story from one of our hosts, Stuart Oliver, who he actually used to be a painter and decorator before he was a Turo host, but he had gotten into a car accident and so he could no longer work in his full-time job. Turo actually gave him the economic opportunity to, make money from that idle car in his driveway and to manage his business from home, which was what he needed given the situation that he was in. And so when I'm thinking about stories like that, it just really motivates me. And I feel like, beyond just like the fun of the marketing challenge, like you actually genuinely feel like you're making a difference to people's lives. And we also have these community events where we meet these hosts in real life and hear from them in person. And we do these probably quarterly. We fly city to city around Australia to meet each of them. And I think those real world interactions like really move something that's digital marketing into the real life where you're like, oh, things I'm doing online are having real impacts to these people. So I think both the challenge of the marketing opportunity itself as well as like the real people impact.
So take me back to 2022. You helped launch Turo into Australia, make it Turo's fastest growing market ever. Incredible. Why Turo? What attracted you and what did you come on to do?
So selfishly, it was probably more of the career opportunity that I saw. For me, I had proven that I could launch a company and do really great go-to-market strategies. I'd proven through Health Match also that I was able to scale a company and manage really big budgets. And so Turo for me was a bit of the best of both worlds where I could essentially combine those skills where I would be launching a company in Australia for the first time. However, it was backed with big tech money, essentially where I could be spending on campaigns that I would never have been able to afford in the past. So for example, working with influencers and celebrities and doing a lot more out of home and working channels I'd never had experience in before. That was the reason why I picked Turo, was because it was just so interesting. I was also naturally drawn to the marketplace business model. Again, very interesting. I just, off the back of that read Anna Cheng, who was the ex-head of growth of Uber's book, The Cold Start Problem. And I was really fascinated by, the nuances of a marketplace.
And notoriously difficult, right? Two-way marketplaces.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like if you grew supply too fast, essentially, you wouldn't have the demand to match it, and then the host would drop off because they weren't making enough money. On the other side of the spectrum, if you were growing your guest side too much and you didn't have enough hosts, the guests would come on and see no cars or really poorly priced cars, and they would also have a really negative opinion or impression of Turo. And so it's just very interesting. And other things that you might not think about would be like if you were growing too fast, you're actually now also creating a lot of tickets or a lot of potential cases that are coming up that would impact like how our CS team works, and then they will have to scale their team to, match the demand. And so there's just so many little nuances in a marketplace that was really interesting. And so I wanted that exposure as well, like to be able to solve that hard problem. And so that was like the main reason why I joined Turo. Another big reason was the team. So I'm really sad as I say this because we had an MD of Australia who was Tim Rosanis. He actually recently got moved to the US team because he was so good at his job. So I don't get to work under him anymore, but he was someone I knew through the Afterwork VC network. When he got his role, he actually hit me up straight away. So I'm technically Turo Australia's first Australian employee other than Tim himself. And so, his leadership was also something that really inspired me to take the role. He's an extremely good leader. I have nothing I could possibly fault him on, but I just think the team itself is so important. He would constantly challenge me, question my line of thinking. Whether I was right or wrong, I still felt like I learned something from his questioning. And he was just so good at problem solving and so good with people that being exposed to him as a leader, I felt like I learned a lot and I felt like I became a better leader myself. And so those were like the main reasons why I joined Turo. As I got deeper into the business, I obviously started feeling a lot more passionate about, what we were building. Again, the hosting community and the real impact that we were making to their lives. And then also as the team grew, I began to love that as well.
Two-sided marketplaces we just mentioned are notoriously difficult. From a marketing perspective, how do you split your time between supply and demand?
So it's definitely changed over time. So at the very, very, very beginning, it was all hands on deck, focusing on getting our first hosts on the platform. And a big focus of it was on quality of supply. Quality of supply is one of the most important things when it comes to starting a marketplace. The difference in quality of supply really impacts the guest experience and the conversion that you'll have on the marketplace. And it also sets a standard for how you're going to grow in the future. So we were extremely meticulous about the types of hosts that we let onto the platform. At times, being able to say no to hosts because they didn't meet the standard. And still to this day, we are extremely careful about the hosts that we let onto a platform. So it's not like a always thing where someone can join the platform and then stay on there forever. It's like we constantly do host calls based on performance metrics. And the whole reason for that is because we want our guests to have a really good experience. So actually 95% of Turo trips are actually 5-star rated experiences. And so that goes to show just how strict we are with the marketplace experience. The thing with marketplaces is that your experience is going to be less consistent potentially than, maybe where, someone owns all the cars because they can handle that experience from end to end, whereas you have different types of hosts with different levels of experience and different approaches to hospitality that might change a guest experience of that trip. And so that's also been really interesting to manage as well.
And also outside of your control. I mean, I'm sure you can provide as much training and parameters, but ultimately they're people outside. You're not there in every trip yourself.
Yeah. And that's why I think for when we talk about brand, and I think in the marketing world, when we hear brand, we think about, what out of home are you doing or what TV ads are you running? But brand is so much more than that. It really seeps into every single function of the business, and it's not something that the marketing team can handle on its own. It's your brand reputation comes from every single touch point you have with that customer. Yes, including that billboard that you put up in front of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but also when they've booked a trip with your host for the first time, how did your host interact with them? If, that could be better, can we train hosts to, to set up their systems to better interact with our customers? And then when something, inevitably will go wrong in car rental because accidents do happen, how have their interactions been with our CS team? How have their interactions been with, how they've been able to claim against their protection plan and things like that? That all impacts our brand reputation and how it flows through to reviews and things like that. And so I always like to think about it from that lens. It's a marketing metric, maybe something that we look at day to day, but it's something that involves the whole business. And so, marketers should really be looking at it cross-functionally. How do you involve every single team in your business to really focus on the customer experience and driving that up so that we can get more word of mouth and so the business can grow faster as well?
And I know from talking to you in previous conversations, you've not always been a believer in brand marketing. Tell me a bit about your journey there at Turo.
Yeah, to go back to the lore of why I haven't been a believer. So, when I first started in marketing, it was a growth hacking role, and we did have limited resources, and it was all about being able to learn as fast as I could and do things as quickly and cheaply as I could. So naturally, this pretty much almost directly contrasts with what's involved with brand marketing, which is, famously very expensive to do and infamously also very difficult to track. And so at that time, I was like seeing companies come out with rebrands where maybe they just changed the hue of the blue that they used in their logo. And then they've got like this like whole PR article about how they've changed their branding. And I would go and think, how does investing money in this help a company grow faster? How does it generate more revenue? How does it generate more profit? Or I would see maybe a brand invest in a billboard and think that like, hey, this couldn't possibly high intent enough to deliver an efficient payback period when you compare it to Google SEM, for example. And that was like very much my mindset earlier in my career. And my view at the time was that, a strong brand is actually built by people who actually use your product and they love it. And I actually still believe in this fundamentally. Like I've seen first-party data and third-party data that shows that positive brand associations are much stronger when someone's actually used your product or service. So again, going back to the Turo stat, 95% of our trips are 5-star trips. So we know that when people use us, they'll feel more positively about the brand than any billboard could possibly make them feel. And so our number one priority as a company should be to get someone to try us for the first time. As a result, I used to be really focused on direct response campaigns. So focusing on building our physical availability, which is where they can shop for our product, and also getting extremely efficient with those channels. My views actually matured beyond this now. And that's all thanks to my time at Turo as well. So I do think there's a time and place for brand marketing. I actually first want to thank my previous manager who also got poached into the US team, Ben Koshebert, for introducing me to the book, How Brands Grow, which for someone who, like me, who's extremely data-driven and interested in consumer psychology, the book actually very scientifically explains why and how brand marketing works. So a lot of my learnings so far have been derived from that book. But yeah, so for brands like Turo, where you actually need a reason to book a car, mental availability, which is something the book talks about, is incredibly important. So for example, you're unlikely to book a car on Turo just because we ran a really persuasive ad. So you're only going to book a car on Turo when you have a very relevant use case where you actually need a car. So this means that your brand needs to be top of mind in relevant moments, which also means that you not only have to be mentally available, but you also have to be associated with the relevant category entry points, which is probably just like their fancier way of saying like having use cases or reasons why someone would enter the category. In this case, the use case is why someone would book a car. So as a result, like I think brand marketing is very important now. I think the fastest search algorithm in the world is the one that's in your head. And so you have to have the reach and frequency, to ensure that you can capture as many of those buyers as possible at the time that they need to make that decision. And so, going back to my previous comment about, superficial rebrands and things like that, I do think there are ways to do brand marketing that could be right or wrong. And this is something that I've learned from the book and from also testing in real life. And so your creative should always be tied into this idea of category entry points, distinctive brand assets, and things like that. And those are the types of branding that you should be investing in, not like, should we change the color of the background or things like that. It should actually be, am I rowing in the right direction to...
Am I moving the needle?
Yeah, exactly. And, these are things that happen in years and not weeks or months. And so that's also like another challenge is like to be able to take stakeholders on that journey as well.
Question to you, if you could only work on one marketing problem for the rest of the year, what would it be and why?
This one's my passion topic, which is just like the AI or answer engine optimization. So it just feels like we're at this pivotal point in time where we're starting to shift from SEO. So for the first time in many, many decades, Google is losing market share to ChatGPT. ChatGPT is still in a very nascent category, to be fair, but for the first time, Google has a competitor. And so it's just really interesting because if I think back, I was too young to have been an early adopter of like Google and SEO. But if you think back to like, you could have been a marketer, 12 years ago when Google was first starting up and you could be like launching a website and immediately being ranked one on Google. It sort of feels like that now, except with like AI search. So that involves, your Google AI overview, that involves your ChatGPT and all these like different products that, people are now using to help them make decisions. And what's really because the category is so nascent, I don't think they've actually gotten the algorithm completely right yet. And so now it sources information from various parts of the internet. So some are better than others. Like, for example, review sites, that's pretty accurate about how someone should feel about a brand, from, communities like Reddit and things like that, from YouTube videos and from blog posts and websites and things like that. But what it doesn't probably do super well is that it also doesn't really distinguish a lot between self-published sources and, third-party unbiased reviews. And so I just think this is a time where you could probably take advantage of the fact that the algorithm's not fully mature, and it might actually, the low-hanging fruit is right there, and it's probably quite easy to rank in those types of queries. And so that's what I'm really passionate about now. I want to find out more about the space. I want to learn more about how to better, discover opportunities in the space and what we should be publishing to take advantage of the time now. It just feels like it's a really strong why now proposition, and I just want to rally as many resources as I can to be working on this problem.
And I completely agree. I think it's another pivotal time in society and marketing, and there's a lot more agencies that are calling themselves discovery agencies. It doesn't sort of matter how you used to be discovered, it's how you want to be discovered in the future, or how people are discovering you in the future. It's been incredible hearing from you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and your words of wisdom and coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Lindsay.
My key takeaway from interviewing Anna, given the fact that I am not a growth marketer, was just how far she's willing to go to experiment. And I love that kind of culture and risk-taking, giving things a go, picking yourself back up when it doesn't work. I think she's got so many great stories of how she's grown brands, and I think there's something in there that we can all learn from.